stories. So there was this really unusually nice and large house at the end of the block in a small town I used to live in. It made me think of a castle with its large eaves and the way it went up on a kind of hill into a woodsy backyard. When I'd ride my bike as a kid, I'd sometimes go up the wrap around drive and look around the backyard. It was rather quiet and isolated, covered in a canopy of trees, and felt more like you were in a forest than just up the block from my house. There was an old open carport in the back along the fence line, and it had this one dated vehicle that looked like it was from the 40s, maybe. It was definitely a vintage car, and I think it was covered, or at least dirty, as if it hadn't been used much. The house windows were so dark you couldn't see inside, and when I walked around the edge of the house, I'd find little toys like from the gumball machines or such littered in the debris there. I never stayed very long though, because it felt like someone was watching me, and I would get creeped out and finally leave, riding back to the opposite end of the street and my house. At some point, I joined the Girl Scouts. I was a brownie at the time, and a neighbor girl friend was in the Bluebirds. She was selling candies, and I was selling cookies. Both of us were going around the block together. My mom told me to stay on our street, though, so I went up towards the end and was headed back when she says, "Let's go sell at that house." She points at the one that I mentioned before, and I sort of gawked at her. "Nobody lives there," I said, but she shook her head and grabbed my arm, pulling me towards it. "Yes, they do. Come on." I followed her reluctantly as we got to the porch and up a few steps, and she knocks on the door. I think I was telling her she was crazy to think anyone lived there as we waited. It didn't take long, though, before I heard footsteps and the door open. I was shocked. This old woman answered and greeted us. She seemed to know my friend, but I didn't say much as my friend spoke back and the lady invited us in to have a snack. I was the kid who would take candy from strangers. I was pretty open to strangers in general, but something about these people freaked me out. There were two others in the house, males about the same age as the woman. I think they were all siblings from what I understood. My friend went inside, urging me to follow. I told them my mother didn't like me going inside with strangers, and I stood with one foot inside the door and one foot on the steps, the two men watching me with an overly friendly smile. One of them was like, "Come on in, we're not strangers. Your friend is in the kitchen and we have cookies." I shook my head and stayed where I was, waiting for my friend to come back. I really felt creeped out for some reason, not sure why, but it was weird when the men laughed at me being so careful, and one of them called me a chicken, clucking and everything. It was really bizarre, but I held my ground and was relieved when my friend came back. The lady and men bid us goodbye, but said I should come in next time. The one guy calling me a chicken again by clucking. They all laughed, but it was really eerie and made me shiver. I don't even recall if I sold anything. Probably not, but I didn't want to be there, so I was happy to go. As we left, my friend looked at me like I was crazy, eating a cookie, I think, from the lady. As we walked back towards our houses, she told me I was stupid and should have gone inside, but I told her they gave me the creeps, plus the fact the inside of their house was dark and heavily curtained. Like, what the fuck? I mean, who keeps their house all shut up like that unless they're hiding something? I ended up telling my mom about the people. She had no idea the house was occupied either. I sort of told her about my explorations, big mistake, but also made sure to tell her I didn't go inside like my friend had. For that, she praised me, but told me not to go back over there ever again if I could help it. I think she was a little worried about the fact that our neighbor went in the house. I think my friend may have gotten in trouble when my mom asked her mom about it. Better safe than sorry, I guess. I have no idea who those people were or why they were so weird and hiding inside. I never knew what their name was or anything. I think I even recall the one who was calling me chicken, saying he'd seen me looking around their house a few times. That was kind of weird because that made me realize they had been watching me. I am now 25 years old. When I was around the age of 12, I didn't have the best life growing up, and some bad things happened to me growing up. I wasn't molested, but my mom was an alcoholic and her boyfriend used to beat her to a bloody mess and taunt me. He would verbally abuse me and back me into a corner and threaten to beat me. He even threatened to rape me. My mother, being half conscious, overheard him saying this, and in a dazed and confused state, grabbed a meat cleaver and whacked him in the neck and nearly severed his head. His blood sprayed all over me, and his lifeless body crumbled to the floor. I was taken to foster care. My foster family tried their best to give me a good life, but after witnessing my mom being beaten every day, and me being taunted by her abusive boyfriend, and watching her murder him to protect me, and her going to prison, I was completely fucked up and beyond any help. My foster family had me baptized, and I even dedicated my life to the Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. But there was always those demons haunting my mind telling me I was a piece of shit, and that I didn't deserve these wonderful people. One night, around 17 years old, I met this junkie by the name of Laura. Laura and I got along really well and had a lot in common. We listened to the same kind of music. We loved comedy movies. Laura was beaten and raped by her father and his friends growing up, and her mother would also lock her out of the house during the winter months and starve her and beat her for talking bad about her father. I could not believe that someone had a worse life than me, but Laura knew how to take the pain away. Laura got me into heroin. Laura and I started using and abusing heroin for the first time in both of our miserable lives. The pain went away, and life seemed beautiful and nothing mattered. I'd gotten a job at a grocery store, but was fired because I passed out during my shift and was taken to rehab. And then, I was released and found Laura again. I got back on the shit. Laura told me how she was supplying her habit, and I agreed to do it with her. Laura and I were prostitutes, and the perverts loved us, and we would make thousands of dollars a week sleeping with men. One day, this rich, successful guy had stopped on the block I was working. He seemed off. He didn't know the lingo, or how to ask properly. Laura told me that he wasn't a real John, and that he was a cop, and to ignore him. The guy informed to me that he wasn't a cop. I believed in him. He was sweet. He was rich, and he had more money than I had ever seen in my entire life. The guy wanted to marry me. I was like, what the fuck? I felt like Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman, but this guy was no Richard Gere. He wasn't ugly, but he was a bit out there. I told him I could not marry him. He then pulled out a gun and shot me 12 times. I lay in the street. I could hear my friend Laura screaming for help, and I could hear sirens, and I was high as a kite and bleeding out in the street. The police took my statement, and when the detective pulled my personal records, he decided I wasn't worth their time. He knew my mother, and he did not care about the fact I was shot. He didn't care that someone tried to murder me. After I got out of the hospital, I was arrested for possession of heroin and prostitution, which are both felonies. The DA and the police tried to sweep it under the rug, and my friend Laura was intimidated by the police and told to stay out of it. Laura knew she had to do something. Laura went to rehab and got clean and began talking to lawyers. Laura was a key witness in the case. Laura talked to her lawyer, and the lawyer contacted the DA and the police department, and they refused to hear any of it. So the lawyer called the FBI and told them what was happening, and federal agents were sent to question me in prison and Laura. We explained the events of that night. The guy had pulled up and asked me to get into his car. He seemed a little off, but mostly harmless. Laura didn't trust him and thought he was a cop, and he didn't know the proper lingo or code words, so Laura did not trust him. I got in his car, went to a motel, had sex, he paid me, then dropped me off. He came back a few more times, and around the fourth time, asked me to marry him. I laughed, because this guy was loaded and wanted to marry a dirty, junky whore like me. He then shot me, and the police seemed more interested in me being a whore and a junkie rather than someone trying to murder me. One of the police officers tried to rape me, but he was never reprimanded. The other officers just joked, "Leave the whore alone," as they laughed, and the cop that tried raping me punched me and slammed my head against the wall. The agents then investigated the police department and found a backup copy of the attempted rape that another rookie cop had backed up after being told to destroy the footage. The guy that shot me was in fact a former police officer that left to become the CEO of some company and had the police in his back pocket. I was released from prison after serving 2 years of a 15-year sentence. The guy that shot me was sentenced to life in prison for attempted murder and some other things. The cop that assaulted me was arrested and sentenced to 15 years in prison. The other officers were sent to prison for conspiracy, and the rookie was honored and was given the rank of lieutenant. Laura and I got off of the drugs and stopped hooking and started a business together. I received a letter from the guy that shot me. It reads, "Dear dirty whore, I will get out of prison. I will find you, and I will fucking kill you and your friend. You will pay for everything that you have done. You may think you have won, but I promise you that your time will come. Don't think you are safe. I still have friends on the outside, and I will find you. My trial is coming up, and I will be set free. I promise you." I never heard from him again. It turns out he was resentenced and sentenced to death after the DA uncovered evidence he was responsible for the death of 4 children that he had murdered. In 1996, he raped a woman and murdered her 4 children. He shot them with an AR-15 and burned their bodies. It's hard to believe that there are scumbags like this wearing a badge. As an officer of the law, they take an oath to serve and protect, but this scumbag and the other scumbags were only protecting each other and not the public, as they promised to do. When I was in the Girl Scouts, I had some pretty awesome friends in my troop. Unfortunately, my leader's husband ruined that for all of us. He ruined just about every event, large and small, for me. Mr. D liked to pick on me a lot. If it wasn't me laughing along with everyone else, it was because he didn't like my clothing. He was ultra-conservative and very religious, and once it was because he didn't like how I led the Pledge of Allegiance, Girl Scout pledge, and how I sang "This Little Light of Mine" at that night's meeting. I usually cried at least once at each event. The thing that caused the disillusion of our troop and finally made all of the other parents realize just how big of a creep Mr. D was happened when I was 12. Our meeting was to have a sleepover that night, and we all had been asked to bring our favorite outfit and our makeup and our hair supplies for a fashion show. Everyone, me most of all, was relaxed more than usual. Mr. D was on a camping trip with his Boy Scouts. We did our usual meeting and badge work, then spread out over the upstairs of the house, changing our clothes in the hallway, on the landing, and 2 or 3 in the bedroom belonging to the scout leader's daughter, also a member of the troop. We did hair and makeup and headed downstairs to show off for each other. After the fashion show, we all changed upstairs once again and swarmed back down to destroy the chips and soda and the pizzas that had just been delivered, stuffed full of tasty junk food. We all settled in for scary storytelling when the biggest horror of the night made an appearance. Mr. D came down the stairs for some pizza. It turned out Mr. D had first canceled his Boy Scout campout for bad weather. He'd been upstairs the whole time, hiding in the dark bedroom, the one whose door stood open the whole time we had been changing our clothes. Half of the girls went home that night, and only 2 ever went back for a meeting after, which basically meant everything we had planned had been canceled. Parents spread the word, and within 2 months, the troop had officially been dissolved. Mr. D, you are a jerk, and as it turns out, a creepy pervert that spied on a bunch of prepubescent girls at their most vulnerable. You ruined something I enjoyed, despite you, and I hope karma gets you big, if she hasn't already. In the 11th grade, I had a falling out with my parents in a big way. I moved in with a friend whose parents owned a motel. They let me stay in one of the rooms with their daughter, and in exchange, I helped out as a chambermaid on the weekends. They were a wonderful and accepting family. During this time at school, I took drama class as one of my high school electives. It was a mix of 11th and 12th grade students, including a 12th grade student named Doug. Doug was huge, and I mean huge. He was about 6'4", and I'm guessing well over 250 pounds. He liked drumming and weed and skipping school for the most part. In class, he would find ways to talk to me, and he didn't have a lot of friends. So, I'd talk to him, no big deal. I was bullied a lot when I was younger, and I knew all about not having friends. I did not see the harm. Over time, he became increasingly insistent. I skipped school with him. I kept making excuses because something about him bothered me. I tried to partner up quickly whenever we had to do so in drama, because Doug would always make a beeline for me. One morning, when my friend and I left for school, we found an empty 26er of Jack Daniels outside our door. We got into trouble over it because her mom assumed it was ours, and we had drank it, or our friends did. We had no idea who had left it. The next day, another empty bottle. And the next, I started to get a sinking feeling. After all, it was no secret at school where I lived. The next drama class, I asked Doug, and he admitted it was him. I didn't know what to do. After that, I felt it wouldn't be a good idea to make a big guy like him upset, so I carefully told him not to come by because I was getting into trouble over the bottles. I figured if he thought he was creating problems for me living there, he would stop. And he did. The next drama class, I performed a monologue where I was covered in fake blood. Anyway, after it was over, I went to clean up. When I got out of the washroom, I found out everyone had paired up for the next assignment, and by default, I ended up with Doug. Worse, he had picked our play, one that had a kissing scene in it. I did not know what to do. How could I go to my teacher and explain? All I knew is that there was no way I could do this play, so I managed to convince Doug that the script was lame and that we should write our own. We created one about two people in line talking back and forth, and it's only at the end you realize they are both dead and waiting in line to go to hell. Rehearsing this play was the most terrifying part. We had to use these soundproof music rooms at the end of a hallway buried in the drama auditorium, somewhere no one but band and drama kids went. One time, as we practiced our lines, Doug got this look on his face. My gut shriveled. The room felt claustrophobic, and the door only had a slit window. All I could think about was how no one would be able to hear me. No one. I got out of there fast. Said I was sick and had to go home. Bottles started appearing on my doorstep again, and then finally a note. 21 pages of rambling and poetry that made up a "if I can't be with you" letter. Something inside me snapped. I was done trying to make waves. Done trying to keep everything under control. I confronted Doug about the note and said if he ever came near me again, I would take it to the principal and the police. I told him I'd given it to a friend for safekeeping. Thankfully, it was near the end of the school year. Doug graduated, and I did not see him again. Looking back, I should have gone to someone sooner, but I was embarrassed by Doug's creepy attention. I was embarrassed that I would be the talk of the school if it got out. I figured my teacher or the principal would think I was overreacting. How could I try and convince them? I had a feeling that something was off. I had no real proof. Not until that note. It scares me how it could have turned out differently. If I had stayed in that room that day, if I'd let it go any longer, if I hadn't listened to my intuition. When I was 13 years old, my family had moved to a Girl Scout camp in the PNW. It was beautiful, 50 acres of forest land. My pa was the ranger. We had just moved into the new house that had been built for us. We had been previously living in a single wide trailer on the property with the 6-person family. So I finally had my own room. The house was a single-story home, and my room was a front corner room. We oddly enough didn't have screens on our windows, but we lived in the middle of the forest, so only thing to worry about was the occasional black bear, which my dogs would scare off. There was an outside office kitty corner to my room, which had a view of my window. It was the end of summer when we finally moved into the new house, and all of the campers had gone home. I remember going to bed that night with my window wide open. I woke up when it was barely light out and saw a bunch of flashing lights outside my window, so I got up and went to the living room to see what was going on. When my pa saw me, he told me to go back to sleep and not to worry about it. At the time, I thought nothing of it and went back to bed. The next morning, I found out what had happened. My mom had woken up at 4:30 a.m. that morning like every morning, took her morning cup of coffee to the office, and started playing her computer games. Then, one of our dogs started to do a low growl. She looked up and saw a man standing under my bedroom window, just standing, mumbling to himself while looking in. She quickly and quietly called my dad, who was inside of the house. Not 5 seconds later, my dad comes storming out of the house and confronts the man, while my mom called the cops. When confronted, the man said nothing, just kept staring and mumbling. My dad grabs him by the arm and pulls him away from my window. The guy just let him do it. FYI, my dad had a minor in developmental studies and was pretty sure this guy was mentally ill, or he was high. It was dark. He couldn't really tell, but he had led him away to the driveway, still angry as hell, questioning why he was there and who he was. The man said nothing, then just looked around him and said, "Forest." The cops arrived and took him away. It's terrifying because of a few things. One, how long was he there? And two, had he been in my bedroom, in the house at all? I never slept with my window open after that. If you're new, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, as it really helps me out. And if you are already subscribed, welcome back and thank you for subscribing.